Hi, my name is Rafa, and today we will be talking about Filipino Spanish as a Spanish dialect that is separate from other kinds of Spanish and is distinct from Chavacano. But instead of doing an academic discussion on Filipino Spanish, we think it's better to show the world the local Spanish that Filipinos speak by doing some sort of show and tell activity. With that, we hope to interview Filipinos who speak the local Spanish variant, giving them a platform to tell their stories here on our channel. For now, we hope to present a quick sketch of what Filipino Spanish is by making a comparison with Filipino English, asking ourselves if it really exists at all, and how it is different from other kinds of variants. So the question is, can you spot the Filipino speaker?
First, a point of order. English speakers will say Philippine Spanish and not Filipino Spanish, as Philippine is an adjective, while Filipino is a noun. However, for Filipinos, it comes naturally for us to think of the word Filipino not just as a noun, but as an adjective, which shows just how Hispanized we are. Thus, we talk about Filipino food, Filipino cuisine, Filipino architecture. So it's natural for us to say Filipino Spanish or Filipino English for that matter, meaning the kind of Spanish or English that Filipinos speak. The next point of order, we make a distinction between Filipinos who speak Spanish in general, whatever variant, and let's call them Spanish-speaking Filipinos, versus Filipinos who speak the local Spanish version. Let's call them Filipino Spanish speakers, with the latter a subset of the former. Please note that we are encouraging Filipinos to learn Spanish in general, whatever variant, although we do want to show more of the local Spanish flavor here in our channel. Anyway, in the end, Filipino Spanish is still Spanish, so the distinction we are making here is only for illustration purposes. Okay, so back to the question, what is Filipino Spanish? To answer that, perhaps it is good to start with Filipino English first before we try to answer what Filipino Spanish is. So what is Filipino English? Most people think of Filipino English in terms of number 1, the accent, number 2, the words used or vocabulary, especially the use of indigenous words, and number 3, the speed and intonation used, especially as influenced by the native tongue of the speakers. But here's the thing, these are all shaped by the experience of the listener and their exposure to both Filipino languages and native English speakers, which introduces another difficulty. What exactly to benchmark against when speaking in English? Should it be British English or the Queen's English? Should it be American English? What does this even mean? What exactly is British English or American English? Seems like a fairly easy question to ask, but really, there are no obvious easy answers. After all, what exactly is the standard British English? Received pronunciation? A London accent? Or should it be American English? Okay, which one? New York? California? Some southern drawl? Clearly, it's not an easy question to answer, so if establishing a sort of English benchmark is already a problem per se, how exactly can one say the particular kind of English is Filipino English? If you think about it, it's as difficult as asking what is American English when there are all sorts of American accents and sounds. Then finally, given that there are many different languages in the Philippines, the accent that a Filipino English speaker carries is very much influenced by the native language that the speaker speaks, whether Tagalog or Cebuano or Ilonggo, etc. Thus, even Filipino English is not necessarily uniform across the country, and that's not necessarily bad, as long as the conversations are mutually intelligible, which they are. So in the end, it goes back to that age-old question, what is art and what is porn? The answer is, you'll know it when you see it. Same with Filipino English. You will know it when you hear it, which is a very imprecise answer for now, yes. But please bear with us and do the following exercise. So here it is. Using some common public audio, can you spot who is Filipino?
The Philippine Election Commission say more than 1,800 machines malfunctioned, but the body failed to heed calls to extend polling hours.
Officials here in Manila say there are two key things President Marcos wants to address. The first is trade, deepening economic cooperation, and the second is defense.
After 3 hearings, labor groups are pleading with the House Committee on Labor and Employment to make a decision regarding the proposed bills to increase the wages of Filipino workers.
The Philippine Election Commission say more than 1,800 machines malfunctioned, but the body failed to heed calls to extend polling hours.
Officials here in Manila say there are 2 key things President Marcos wants to address. The first is trade, deepening economic cooperation, and the second is defense.
After 3 hearings, labor groups are pleading with the House Committee on Labor and Employment to make a decision regarding the proposed bills to increase the wages of Filipino workers.
So, what do you think? It should be obvious that Speaker C is speaking in Filipino English, perhaps by a process of elimination or by sheer exposure to different kinds of English and knowing what kind of English is spoken in the Philippines. Now, knowing the difficulty even with Filipino English, imagine the difficulty when one talks about Filipino Spanish. First of all, not everybody is exposed to Spanish in the first place. Then similar with English, there are many kinds of Spanish and there's so many different kinds of Spanish accents. And then finally, there's not a lot of exposure to Filipino Spanish in the first place among Filipinos. Plus, the Spanish that the native Filipino Spanish speaker speaks is very much influenced by the native tongue that person speaks, just like with Filipino English. So it becomes harder but not impossible to discern what exactly is Filipino Spanish. And just like Filipino English, it becomes a case of knowing it when one hears it. So here's a quick exercise. Who is the Filipino Spanish speaker among the choices here? Can you guess?
Filipinas ha iniciado una campaña electoral de 3 meses que culminará el próximo 10 de mayo. Una decena de candidatos aspira a suceder.
En el caso de Mario Vargas Llosa se reconoce una trayectoria que no necesita muchas presentaciones. El escritor peruano es ya premio Cervantes, académico de la lengua.
Hay grande veneración para Santa Rosa de Lima en Filipinas, que es porque Santa Rosa de Lima es patrón de Perú y de Filipinas. Somos el único país hispánico en Asia.
Filipinas ha iniciado una campaña electoral de 3 meses que culminará el próximo 10 de mayo. Una decena de candidatos aspira a suceder.
En el caso de Mario Vargas Llosa se reconoce una trayectoria que no necesita muchas presentaciones. El escritor peruano es ya premio Cervantes, académico de la lengua.
Hay grande veneración para Santa Rosa de Lima en Filipinas, que es porque Santa Rosa de Lima es patrón de Perú y de Filipinas. Somos el único país hispánico en Asia.
Okay, that was a dead giveaway for those who recognize President GMA's voice. That audio clip F would be the Filipino Spanish speaker. And indeed, President GMA speaks a kind of Spanish associated with Filipino Spanish, although her accent and speaking style is not necessarily uniformly seen across all Filipinos who speak Spanish or who consider themselves Filipino Spanish speakers. It's pretty much the same as in the case of Filipino English. Code switching. For both Filipino English and Filipino Spanish speakers, code switching is normal, especially when in an informal environment, as long as it's clear that the people they are speaking with can actually understand the conversation. For example, Filipino English speakers in Metro Manila will easily resort to Taglish or Tagalog English when speaking among themselves, but will tend to heavily prefer Filipino or English depending on the situation. The same is true for Filipino Spanish speakers.
Now listen to this conversation between 2 Filipinos, one who is my abuelo or grandfather, who is a Filipino Spanish speaker. Note that this kind of conversation happens quite frequently at home, and code switching does happen, which might lead some people to think that my abuelo wasn't speaking Spanish but in some Creole Spanish variant.
Alright, te voy a preguntar. Ese sitio, ¿de qué país? Ese sitio, ese escuadra que
Este escuadra,
sí,
no estuve en este país.
sí, por eso, es de Sudamérica.
Sudamérica ¿Qué nación de Sudamérica?
Brasil.
Brasil.
Se llama favela.
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 I didn't put
To the casual observer, it might sound like Creole Spanish, but in reality, it's just code switching, which can happen very often and naturally, especially amongst multilingual speakers. I know that my lolo spoke Spanish, having lived with him almost my entire life, as well as having learned the language from him myself, apart from independently studying it. I know that he followed Spanish grammar and rules with a healthy dose of local words interspersed in the conversation, sometimes with code switching happening in between. It's one of our goals in this channel to explore Filipino Spanish, and as you might very well guess, it cannot be done in just one video. So this is really just the start of a journey, my journey, to understand Filipino Spanish better. If you want to join me in this continuing adventure, please like and subscribe to our channel to get more updates on my quest to explore Filipino Spanish. For now, that's all we have for today. Bye for now and hope to see you again. Viva los Filipinos! Mabuhay ang mga Filipino!
I take pleasure in sending the following greeting to the United States and to the world at large. Me pide usted dos palabras. Diré algunas ideas mías sobre la invención o invento. El aparato que usted manipula es maravilloso porque reproduce la figura movible al mismo tiempo que emite el sonido de la voz. Cuando con el tiempo se perfeccione este invento, el mundo quedará sorprendido ante los cuadros vivientes y parlantes que ello exhibirá sobre el tiempo. La ciencia ha acrecentado el paso acelerado de los adelantos modernos. Por medio de la ciencia conservamos la salud e inclusive devolvemos la juventud a los que le han perdido. La ciencia también ha impulsado los inventos que se dirigen a la destrucción del hombre por el hombre. Estas dos tendencias contrarias todavía nos dicen que la cantidad de la animalidad en nosotros es muy grande. ¿Cuándo podía la ciencia perfeccionar aparatos que reformen y regeneren a los hombres? ¿Cuándo podrá nuestra humanidad decir que va camino de la perfección moral, de la fraternidad de todos los hombres, de todos los pueblos, de todas las razas y de todos los credos?